Hello, ladies and gentlemen. In the midst of pain, it's easy to feel isolated, as though God is distant or absent from our struggles. Yet this is when his presence is most crucial, even if we cannot sense it. God is never absent. He is always working behind the scenes, shaping our hearts and our lives we may not immediately understand. The difficulty lies in trusting that his presence is not defined by what we see, but by his promise to never leave us. In the quiet, in the pain, God is at work, refining us and preparing us for a greater purpose that we cannot yet comprehend. When we face hardships, it's natural to question where God is and why he allows us to go through such trials. But rather than asking, where is God, we are invited to shift our focus to a more powerful question: what is God doing in me through this? Every moment of pain can be seen as an opportunity for growth if we choose to view it through the lens of God's redemptive work. He uses these moments not to destroy us, but to mold us, to strip away the things that hinder us, and to build us into the people he created us to be. The process is painful, but it is purposeful. In the darkest moments, it can feel like we are carrying a weight too heavy to bear. Yet this is when God's grace and strength are made evident. We may not always feel his presence or see the immediate outcome, but the truth remains that God is walking with us through every trial. The pain we experience is not meaningless. It is the fire that purifies, the forge that shapes. We can rest in the knowledge that we are never walking alone. God is faithful even when we can't sense his nearness, and his presence is often most profound in the silence of suffering. The refining process that comes with pain is often uncomfortable, but it is also the very thing that strengthens our faith. God doesn't promise an easy life, but he promises to be with us through every moment, working all things for good. As we endure hardships, we begin to understand that pain is not a punishment, but a tool of transformation. In these moments, God is forging in us a faith that is unshakable, a faith that is tested and proven. While the struggle may feel overwhelming, it is in these moments that God does his deepest work. Pain is a necessary part of the journey, a part of the process that brings us closer to the person God is calling us to become. Every struggle has a purpose, every hardship a lesson. Even when we don't see how or when or why things will change, we can trust that God is using our pain to create something beautiful. It is through these difficult seasons that we are shaped, refined, and ultimately prepared for the greater things that God has in store for us. The pain doesn't define us, but rather the way God uses it to shape us into his likeness does. It's easy to become frustrated when things don't unfold according to our timeline. We often set expectations for how and when things should happen, but God's timing doesn't always align with those expectations. His plan is bigger than our momentary desires, and though we may feel delayed, his timing is always perfect. There's purpose in the waiting. While we may feel like we're stuck or overlooked, God is at work in ways we cannot see, preparing us for something greater than we imagined. It's in the waiting that we are shaped, stretched, and strengthened for what lies ahead. Our impatience stems from the belief that we know what's best for us, and we can't always understand why God's answers seem to come slowly or not as expected. But God's delay is not a denial. It's often a divine setup for something more powerful. While we wait, we may question if our prayers are being heard, but God's timing is never random, it's intentional. He is aligning everything in our lives for the perfect moment, a moment that we may not even be able to recognize until it arrives. Trusting in his timing means surrendering our need to control the pace and accepting that his way is always better. In moments when we feel like time is running out, we must remember that God's plan is always bigger than our immediate desires. It's easy to feel like we're missing out or that we've been forgotten, but in reality, we are being prepared for the future he has in store for us. We often focus on the timing of events as they relate to our own desires, but God is orchestrating everything to fulfill his perfect purpose. His plan unfolds in the perfect moment, and sometimes that moment takes longer than we expect. When we trust in his timing, we open ourselves up to the fullness of his will rather than rushing ahead into something that might not be what we truly need. When waiting for answers, it's important to shift our perspective. God is not making us wait because he doesn't care or because he's ignoring our needs. His silence is not evidence of his absence, but of his wisdom. He knows the perfect timing for everything in our lives. What feels like a delay is simply God positioning us for something greater, something that we may not yet be ready for. In our waiting, God is refining us, strengthening our faith, and preparing us to receive what he has in store, which is often far more than we imagined. There is often a deeper purpose in the waiting than we initially realize. God's timing isn't just about the events themselves, it's about our growth during the process. Waiting stretches us, challenges us, and develops perseverance within us. It's not easy, but in the end, it's worth it because we can trust that what God has prepared for us is far better than anything we could have planned ourselves. In the delay, he is cultivating something bigger and better, something that only his perfect timing can bring to fruition. Trusting his timing means trusting that everything is working for our good and his glory, even when it doesn't make sense at the moment. In the midst of life's challenges, it can feel as though the weight of our struggles is more than we can bear. Yet, if we take a step back and shift our perspective, we begin to see that every struggle holds the potential for something greater. Rather than viewing our battles as burdens or obstacles, we can choose to see them as opportunities for breakthrough. God doesn't waste a single moment of pain or difficulty. Every challenge is a stepping stone, preparing us for the future he is shaping us for. Our struggles are not signs of defeat, but the groundwork for victory. God uses the hard seasons of life to build something in us that we would not be able to develop otherwise. When we face trials, we may not understand why they are happening, but we can trust that God is using those struggles to develop perseverance, character, and faith. Through these trials, we are refined, strengthened, and transformed into the people God has called us to be. Our weaknesses become the places where his strength is made perfect, and the areas we once thought would break us become the areas where God's glory shines brightest. The challenges we encounter today are not the end of our story. They are preparing us for the testimony we will share tomorrow. Every battle we face is an opportunity to deepen our faith and to see God's hand at work in our lives. As we navigate the difficulties of life, we may not see the full picture, but God is working behind the scenes, laying the foundation for a greater purpose. The pain we endure today is not in vain. It is being used by God to shape us, to prepare us, and to equip us for the plans he has already set in motion. It is through struggle that our faith is tested and refined. Without difficulty, our faith remains shallow and untested. It is in the storms of life that we discover who we truly are and who God is. As we face adversity, God is building in us a deeper reliance on him, teaching us to trust him when everything around us seems uncertain. Our struggles are not just random or meaningless. They are the very things that forge a deeper, stronger relationship with God. In the midst of hardship, we can hold on to the truth that God is using our struggles to make us more like Christ. The struggles we face today are preparing us to walk in the fullness of what God has planned for us. We may not understand the process, but we can trust in the outcome. The trials and challenges that seem overwhelming now are laying the groundwork for the testimony we will share in the future. What feels like defeat today will one day be the story of God's faithfulness and deliverance. In every battle, God is shaping us, equipping us, and preparing us for the purpose he has designed us to fulfill. Through it all, we can trust that he is using our struggles for something far greater than we can imagine. In the midst of life's most challenging moments, it's easy to feel like we're walking through the storm alone, especially when the weight of our struggles seems unbearable. But the truth is, we are never alone. Even when we feel isolated and disconnected, God is with us, walking beside us every step of the way. His presence isn't determined by how we feel, but by his unwavering promise to never leave us or forsake us. The storms may rage around us, but God's closeness never wavers. He is with us in the deepest valleys, offering his comfort, his peace, and his strength. In the thick of trials, we may question where God is or why we can't feel his presence. But just because we don't see his hand at work doesn't mean he's not there. God is not distant or indifferent to our pain. He is actively walking with us, offering his love and guidance. Even in our most difficult moments, his spirit sustains us in ways we don't always understand, giving us the strength to endure and the courage to keep moving forward. We may not see the path clearly, but we can trust that he is leading us through it. The most profound way God walks with us is not in dramatic miracles or visible interventions, but in the quiet, gentle presence of his spirit. In those moments when we feel exhausted, when we feel like giving up, God's spirit comes alongside us, offering comfort and encouragement. It is in the quiet whispers of his presence that we find the strength to keep going. Even when we are too weak to take another step, God's presence is the power that sustains us and carries us through. In every season, whether in joy or sorrow, God is right there with us, closer than we can imagine. His companionship isn't conditional on our circumstances. When we feel most alone, he is closest to us, guiding us and protecting us. We may not always recognize his presence, but that doesn't change the truth that he is there, walking with us, providing what we need for each moment. His presence is a constant source of hope, reminding us that we are never abandoned, no matter what we face. When we remember that we are not walking through life's trials alone, we find strength and peace that transcends understanding. It changes the way we approach our struggles. Instead of feeling defeated by the weight of our circumstances, we can face them with the confidence that God is with us. He does not ask us to carry the burden alone. With him by our side, we can endure any hardship, knowing that his presence is enough to sustain us. Even in the darkest moments, God is there, holding us up, comforting us, and guiding us through to the other side. When we invite God into our circumstances, something profound happens. He doesn't just change the situation, he changes us. In his presence, our perspective shifts. What once seemed impossible or hopeless now becomes part of a larger story that God is writing for us, a story filled with purpose and divine direction. In the chaos of life, it can be hard to see beyond the immediate storm. But when we welcome God's presence into the center of our struggles, he opens our eyes to the bigger picture, revealing that the struggles are not meaningless, but a part of his perfect plan. God doesn't always offer us immediate answers or remove the challenges we face, but his presence brings clarity and understanding. Instead of focusing on the problem, we begin to focus on God's faithfulness, his promises, and his ability to work all things together for our good. In his presence, our hearts are aligned with his will and our vision becomes clear. What once seemed like an obstacle now becomes an opportunity for growth and transformation. Our perspective is no longer shaped by fear or frustration, but by the assurance that God is in control and that he is with us through every step. The greatest transformation isn't the change in our circumstances, but the change in our hearts. When God enters into our situation, he does more than provide an answer. He shifts our mindset. Instead of viewing life's challenges as burdens, we start to see them as divine opportunities for growth and testimony. What seemed like a setback becomes a setup for God's glory. The power of God's presence in our lives is not just in what he does for us, but in how he changes the way we perceive what's happening around us. Through his presence, we learn to see everything through the lens of faith, trusting that he is using it all for a greater purpose. When we open ourselves to God's presence, we begin to understand that our struggles are not interruptions to God's plan. They are part of his plan. Our challenges, our pain, and our waiting are all tools that God uses to shape us into the people he has called us to be. What seemed hopeless or frustrating at first begins to make sense when we allow God to shift our perspective. We start to see how he is working in ways we couldn't have imagined, weaving together every detail of our lives into something beautiful, meaningful, and purposeful. God's presence doesn't just change our circumstances, it changes the way we live in those circumstances. It transforms our hearts, renews our minds, and shifts our entire outlook. When we invite God into the situations that seem impossible, he doesn't just give us answers, he gives us a new way to see. Through his presence, he allows us to step back, see the bigger picture, and trust that every moment, every trial, and every triumph is part of the bigger story he is writing for us. In the end, the transformation isn't just in the outcome, but in the way we experience life through his eyes. Thanks for watching.